Good morning. My name is Dr. Erin Findley. I'm a psychologist in Napa, California, and I'm here today to talk with you about the intersection between neurodivergence and trauma and developmental trauma. So, um, just to give you a bit of information about me, I am the director of training development at the Developmental Trauma Training Institute. I'm also autistic, ADHD, and gifted. So I'm speaking now not just from a clinical standpoint, but also from a lived experience perspective. So, when I'm talking about developmental trauma, I'm specifically referring to bad things happening in the context of an absent, abusive, or neglectful caregiving environment. So, it's not just big catastrophic events, it's the ongoing experience of not being seen, understood, accurately responded to, in addition to catastrophic events. And neurodivergent children are particularly vulnerable to this because we have different social signaling systems. There's been some great research out lately looking at the social signaling systems between particularly autistic and non-autistic people, and there are just some mismatches that are not obvious on the surface. So because we have different social signaling systems, the way that we signal distress or connection or interest can be frequently misunderstood. And that creates a chronic misattunement in the caregiving environments, whether it's parents or schools um, or faith communities or what have you, because there's an expectation on the part of the caregivers that the child will behave a certain way, and when the child behaves in a different way, the caregivers often misattribute or misunderstand why the kid is acting that way. And so this leaves the kid in a perspective where they are um, frequently misunderstood. So, an example of this might be a child freezing instead of crying when scared, or a child smiling or going blank when feeling shame or feeling overwhelmed, or the use of repetitive behaviors like stimming or using language gestalts, which are like phrases that have meaning to the child but don't necessarily mean what they literally mean. Um, and all of these ways of signaling can confuse caregivers, can overwhelm caregivers, can frustrate caregivers, and they can be interpreted by the caregivers as defiance or manipulation or emotional withdrawal when that's not what the kid is intending to signal at all. It's just what's happening inside of the kid and how their nervous system signals naturally. But what happens is this creates a persistent loop of misattunement. And that persistence of that loop is itself traumatic. And then when you add traumatic events, like bigger traumatic, not bigger, but more like single incident traumatic events on top of the chronic baseline of misattunement, traumatic misattunement, now you've got developmental trauma. One of the things that children do in this scenario is they mask. And masking is not a choice. Masking is a survival trauma adaptation. It's a survival strategy. So that might look like internalizing authentic signals that are unsafe or socially unacceptable for whatever reason. It might be something like, a kid freezing their body up to keep their body from doing movements that would be normally natural to them but would get misinterpreted, for example. So the kids learn if I signal naturally for myself, I'll either be ignored or I'll be punished, which is even worse, right? And so it's not just social camouflaging. It's not a choice where it's like, oh, I know that I'm going into an audience that's expecting more of an academic approach, so I'll speak more academically, where at home I might speak more casually. That's social camouflaging. Masking is a necessary protective behavior. Masking is one of those things that, nobody puts on a mask on purpose. They do it to survive and to avoid traumatic consequences. And so the cost of that masking for the child who is growing up into a neurodivergent adult, the cost of that masking is a disconnection from self. It's an innate fundamental distrust of my own signaling in order to prioritize what would be safe or helpful for the caregiver. A lot of times clients who come in and say, I don't know how I feel, or I don't know what's happening in my body, that's safety for them. That's more safety for them because they learned they couldn't, quote unquote, trust their own signals, um, because everybody else was telling them that they were wrong. I'm thinking of a client now who for the longest time didn't know she was autistic, found out in her adult years. And she always thought that her sensory sensitivity was just her being hypersensitive because that's what she had been told her entire life, right? And the reality was, no, she really actually was experiencing physical pain from certain sensory experiences. And it's just that nobody in her life believed her, right? And so that kind of thing, it, she didn't have the room to be able to say, no, this really is what I'm feeling, because as a kid you don't have that. You don't have that knowledge, then that deep trust of self that might happen. Instead, what happens is you learn to discredit your own signals. And so this young woman finally was able to realize, no, this is actually happening to me. I'm not making it up. I'm not being too sensitive. This is my bodily experience. And it took her a long time to trust that. Um, and so it's not resistance. It's a learned safety mechanism, learned in the sense of it's not innate, but it doesn't mean it's a choice. And that's a really, really important thing for clinicians to be aware of, because the minute you start assuming there's choice involved, then you start going down the path of incorrect attribution. And so this chronic misattunement, it's traumatic, it's not neutral, it's cumulative. It's that subtle invalidation, like for people who struggle with eye contact. Look at me when I'm talking to you. I don't ask my clients to look at me. I ask them to direct their attention towards me in whatever way feels natural to them, right? So that's just one minor shift that can invite clients to trust their own body while still going for the same goal, which is your attention. Um, you know, Another thing that kids are often asked, why can't you just behave normally, or stop making those noises or doing those movements? It's distracting. Um, it leads to that fundamental distrust and rejection of self. So when you're working with a client, if you're a clinician, when you're working with a client who is neurodivergent, it's important to start out with the hypothesis that this client may be experiencing developmental trauma. I don't know all people in the world, so I can't say for sure that every single one of them has it. I know that everyone that I've worked with has. Um, and so, in the spirit of not having assumptions, let's not completely assume it, but have it as a hypothesis that's more likely than not. Um, and then your task as a clinician, or if you're a parent, is instead of trying to get the person to signal differently, start learning how to read their signals, the ones that they naturally send. I call this process calibration. And I do this a lot in mixed neurotype couples therapy, where we actually spend a lot of time digging into what are you doing and what's happening on the inside, because so often what happens is the client will be doing or saying something and experiencing something else, and that the partner will be completely attributing something different. One person is saying, I can't take the trash out. And the other person thinking, well, you obviously don't care about the relationship, because if you did, you would, be, taking out the trash and doing things the way that we talked about. And if the person is experiencing a neurodivergent block, then the other person, the partner, if they don't know that is a thing, they will start to think this is about you don't care. This is about you being belligerent or stubborn or unwilling, or that you're deprioritizing the family or whatever. So when you're a caregiver, a therapist, a partner to a neurodivergent person, one of your core tasks is to learn how to accurately read the signals they're naturally sending. If your partners, it's a little tricky because y'all have to find a way to meet in the middle, and that's a subject for a different day. But um, but the more that you can learn how to interpret them accurately, the more likely it is they will be able to relax, which will allow them to co-regulate with you, have more relational safety with you. And that in and of itself is healing. So healing this chronic misattunement through this calibration process is really, really important. And it helps undo the core aloneness that's at the base of so much developmental trauma. So if this conversation about neurodivergence and developmental trauma has been interesting or helpful to you, I want to encourage you to check out our website at the Developmental Trauma Training Institute.com or dtti.co, which is the shorter and more accurate version of it. We also have 3 upcoming events that might be of interest to you. Next week we have an online Digging Roots Foundations course, which dives into the theory of developmental trauma and also provides you with concrete exercises designed specifically to surface trauma gently and to heal it effectively. The next one after that is the BIPOC only Digging Roots Brain Spotting training happening in Boston. That's at the end of August. And then there's also a Digging Roots Brain Spotting training happening in Alaska at the beginning of September that's open to all. So if you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to write them in the chat, and go to dtti.co for more information. And we'll see you all next week.